Previously on Awkward Conversations.
As parents, we got to harken back to our experience as parents and know that, hey, kids going to be kids and they're going to do what they do. So we need to get as much information as possible.
You can pull up all of the arrest records and things like that for that campus and the surrounding area. One of the things that's really cool about that is inside of there, they have arrests and violations for drug and alcohol laws.
Yeah, I mean,
I'm old now.
I've heard of Borgs, right? Like,
I'm so old. I'm so out of touch. Okay.
But what was big when I was out there was like Jungle Juice, right?
That was big. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it was just pour gallons of whatever.
Exactly, right? And as far as like finding out about the school through hashtags, I think it's a really good way, especially if you are a parent and you're not really going to have that open communication with other students. It's just you're just not,
Right.
There's a level of distrust, which shouldn't be there if you have that healthy relationship established, but unfortunately it's really common.
Unless you're Dr. Mackie and
Exactly.
you will just walk up to people and be like, you need to answer my question right now. Which I feel like also, go ahead and do that,
Yeah, totally. Yeah,
if your kid winds up at that school, they're going to be like, oh, I talked to I met your parents.
Well, and what I love about this is, this is something that I feel like young people have been doing for a long time, right? So we're kind of using their techniques to learn about the thing, we're going on their level. And, so you search maybe hashtag Borg, X university, but then also the million other hashtags that are going to pop up are going to kind of lead you down that like rabbit hole in a good direction of really getting, a sense and a feel for things.
One thing I want to add to that, I think that I was really lucky going to Santa Barbara because even though there was a lot of out of control use, there were really good programs set up as well.
Yeah.
Like we had really good like sobriety groups that were just kind of around, like young people's AA, young people's groups like that. And there was a lot of like sober, curious people too. And a lot of that, unfortunately, comes from people blacking out one too many times, failing their courses one too many times. And the fact that they were able to provide support that actually reached students.
I really benefited from that at my school. As I talked about, my first semester of college was a disaster. I struggled with some severe substance use, and my parents were very concerned about it anyway, so I actually wound up going to a school that was relatively close. And they wanted me to come home on weekends so that I wasn't partying. But instead, I just was like, well, cool, Monday through Thursday then. And I don't recommend that. I got a 0.9 GPA my first semester. I was almost kicked out of the dorms for being a danger to myself because of my drinking, because of my using, and because of my behavior while doing that. And this is 20-some years ago. There were support systems, but I definitely, having watched kind of the growth of sobriety, particularly in young people now, it's beautiful now because it's so different. And young people's recovery, young people's AA, young people's NA, young sober events. There's so many more people now, I think, at a younger age finding sobriety and having examples of it and people talking about it, which was not something that a lot of people did 20-something years ago. There was still, and there still is a stigma, but my school was wonderful at, I had to go to, drug and alcohol classes, and I had to go do individual therapy. And I would love to say that, I got sober right away. It took a little while, but knowing that those programs were there and that my school really encouraged them it felt like, and seeing other people at my school that I knew, I was like, oh, okay, well, I'm not totally alone. Yeah. It was still a struggle, but it did make it a lot easier. So I think also students knowing there are on-site counselors, there are school therapists that you can talk to that your parents don't have, you know what I mean? You can go and find these services, I think is also super important for students to know, because so often when they're at home or younger, they can't just walk into, a therapist's office or a, counseling center. But now those services are there and so vital. And they really, I am always glad that I was able to be a part of that. I think it really helped me at a very vulnerable time in my life.
Right. Definitely when you're touring campuses, like Jodie mentioned, asking the questions of the administrators. What type of programming that you have? Typically for orientation, there's usually some type of mandated session by the health and wellness or counseling center. When your student pays their tuition, they get access to medical care, to counseling and therapy sessions. And if they exhaust those sessions on the campus, they'll be referred out through a care manager to someone in the local community. But another key piece of that, I'm so glad that Jodie mentioned about the support her campus was able to provide her. But there's a growing movement across the country called Collegiate Recovery Programs. And a lot of it's housed under the Association of Recovery and Higher Education, ARHE, which I am proud to be a member of, because we believe that no student should have to choose between maintaining their sobriety and getting a college education, because we know that if a student leaves and they go to treatment for 90 days or so, when they come back, the college environment hasn't changed that much. Making sure, and you can ask if your campus has a collegiate recovery program, particularly if your student went to a recovery high school or they've had issues with substance misuse in the past, you can search on the ARHE website for colleges that have collegiate recovery programs to see what's a better fit.
I think it's incumbent upon universities to train all of their staff and their faculty to look for red flags with students. I mean, I've had some amazing students who just fall off, just stop coming to class. And I mean, I would notice, because I took a great interest in my students. And then over time, I would try to form a relationship, say, why don't you come talk to me in my office? And there have been instances where the student just broke down and said, I need help, and I was able to direct them.
I had an incredible counselor in college, Dr. Bill Comerford, who did exactly that for me. He, I wasn't showing up to class. He took a look at the rest of my grades and kind of called me in and was like, hey, what's going on? This doesn't seem like you. And I have a picture of me standing with him when I graduated, and was so, it was so comforting to know that there was someone there who saw me and who recognized me. And that meant all the world. We'll be right back after this message.
Saving lives means staying informed. Knowing the dangers of using fake prescription pills can help those you care about and keep our community safe. As a parent, educator, neighbor, or friend, we all play a role in building safe and healthy futures for ourselves and our loved ones. Do your part to take the first step today. Visit GetSmartAboutDrugs.com to access education, prevention, and treatment resources. Fake prescription pills laced with fentanyl are deadly. Be their protector. Be informed. Visit GetSmartAboutDrugs.com.
Natalie, I know that you are in recovery, and I would love to hear a little bit more about your story.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm in recovery for marijuana, which is something that a lot of people don't think is like an issue. I certainly didn't. My big thing was always, it's not addictive. It's just a plant. It's natural. This isn't, it's not cigarettes. It's not any stronger kind of drug. It's just weed, right? So I started smoking when I was 17, and pretty shortly after that became like a daily smoker. And it wasn't until I was 21. And at that point, everything was totally legal, so it wasn't a legal concern whatsoever. But I was really unstable. And I realized, again, like after I got my ADHD diagnosis, I realized that a lot of why I was smoking was to kind of self-medicate.
Right.
But it made my anxiety terrible. I was just in a fog all the time, and I didn't realize it until I got clean. But I wanted to get clean far before I actually did. I would go to bed each night thinking, like, I'm just not going to smoke in the morning. I'm just going to wait until after school, after class. And without fail, every single morning I would wake up, and within 15, 30 minutes, I would be, smoking.
Right.
And I had friends, and I had a little experience with AA, which was really important because I knew, these programs exist.
Right.
Oh, there's something out there. So I looked into it a little bit, and I found MA, which is Marijuana Anonymous. And after, going to a few meetings, I realized I'm straight up a marijuana addict. And I didn't think that was possible,
right.
And it was really hard to come to terms with. But after, I've been working the program, and it's work. I have to emphasize that. It's not easy.
Right. A lot of self-examination.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. But it's worth it,
Yeah.
And today, I I have a pretty good chunk of time under my belt. And
Congrats.
Thank you.
Bravo.
Thank you. And I'm happier and I'm more balanced. But that being said, I also don't want to like come on here and villainize marijuana because I know that it does a lot of good for a lot of people.
Right. But it's important to have those conversations, much like alcohol now that cannabis, I think, is much more socially acceptable, is being legalized in a lot of places. And because it is used sometimes for medical purposes or seizure disorder, things like that, that there is a misconception that it is completely safe. Much like what happens with alcohol. People are like, oh, well, if you can buy it at the corner store, then it must be fine. Totally. But we were talking about earlier, alcohol-related deaths are one of the killed more people in than COVID in 2021. Mm-hmm. So it's recognizing that any substance, when misused, can be problematic. Medication that you're prescribed can be problematic. All of these things, and I love that you talk about MA because it's one of the sort of lesser known 12-step programs, but is so important. And some people really do not like it's much like alcoholics, and there are those people that pick up a drink. I'm one of them, and it's all bets are off. It is we don't know where we're going or what we're doing, but it's not going to be pretty. And I think it's really important to let people know that maybe even if alcohol isn't your problem, if you find yourself in a situation like that where you are relying upon any substance in order to get you out of bed in the morning, or you keep telling yourself it's going to be different, I'm not going to do this tomorrow, and you find yourself doing it the next day, that's the cause for concern.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Like you said, Natalie, not everyone who uses substances will become addicted or have a substance use disorder. But why this conversation about college students and young adults is so critical is because 80 to 90% of people who develop a substance use disorder, in their lifetime, their onset of use started in their adolescence and in their young adulthood. And so this is where we want to reemphasize, delaying the onset of use is absolutely essential to helping people have a healthy life and a healthy relationship with substances in the long run. Right,
but I mean, particularly again back to like frontal lobe development and brain development, it's really not done until your mid-20s. So even if you're in college and you're 20 years old, it definitely can shift and change the trajectory of things. I know as a parent, one of the things that we struggle with, particularly when we send our kids out into the world, is we want them to have fun and have new experiences and all this, but we worry that they're going to make the wrong decisions. And Dr. Mackie, as somebody who's been on college campuses as a professor and now as a parent of 2 college students, what are some of the things that you have seen your students, your kids go through, and how can parents and administrators and staff help students have the most rich, wonderful experience while also staying safe?
I'm sitting on a college campus right now. My program, my organization, STEM NOLA, is housed on Xavier University in New Orleans. I have like 50 college interns this summer. And my 12 years as a college professor, it seemed like it always comes down to like an issue of self-esteem. And the issue of self-esteem usually breaks itself out in 2 components, either identity or belonging, right? So our kids now are looking for validation. Our validation is coming from so many different places, coming from home, coming from community, especially coming from social media. And kids need a place to belong. All of us need to find our tribe. So what we try to do, and what I try to do for my interns, the students I work with, is try to find out their interests and try to put them in places around people that have similar interests. So, because sometimes when you're not a part of the mainstream and you don't do what other people do, and I never forget a young man came in my office when I was at Tulane. He had transferred. He was from rural America, and he said, I'm not like them. And I'm like, well, who are them? And we had to spend a lot of time having conversations, helping him to understand that who he was okay, and he didn't need to self-medicate to be like them. It was all right for him to make the choice to be who he was. And we just had to find the right tribe to plug him into so he can be validated on a daily basis, not seeking validation from other people. So I worry about that with my kids, but I also worry about that with every kid I come in contact with.
Right. And if you're not the one that's giving them the validation and that self-esteem, they'll find it somewhere. And if they're finding it through unhealthy outlets and through unhealthy things, you know, whether it's online, on social media, and they're getting that reinforcement of like, yeah, this is awesome, you know, Borgs or whatever. You know, I feel so old. But, you know, if that's the thing, it's that, I mean, I watch it with my kids. It's like, that's the thing that becomes super popular. And, you know, when they get that outside reinforcement of like, yeah, you're doing a great job, that's all that they're looking for. And if, you know, building that up before they even get there is so key and so important.
And then on the college campus, you know, they say hurt people hurt people. A lot of people come to college campuses and they're lacking.
Yeah.
And instead of, you know, and their whole goal is to find other people and bring people where they are, not to go, not to seek to where other people are. So those are issues that we have to be concerned about.
And I always remind myself too, like college students, we have sort of this idea that like once they're 17, 18, oh, you're an adult now. And you're so far from, you know, and as parents, we look at it and you're like, you're not grown yet. And, you know, try telling that to an 18, 19-year-old. I remember it. I was like, I'm an adult, you know, and they're like, oh, you so aren't, you know, and that is, it's so important to remember that, yes, that's the next step in their freedom. But they're not ready to make like a lot of adult decisions yet. And most of the decisions that they're going to make are going to look a lot like the stupid ones they did in high school.
Jodie, I'd like to add one thing here. So one of the things, I definitely think that parents cannot discount the amount of influence they still have in their kids' life, especially those first, second-year students. So there's a local pharmacy I worked at LSU for a number of years before my office move, but there's a local pharmacy. You would be surprised the amount of kids that have to step to the side and call their parents to find out what's their insurance information, to get prescriptions. They're still looking for your guidance. It's like, I don't have my insurance card. Yeah. Like, can I get my medicine in this state? They're still looking to their parents for guidance. So one, I think it's really important to still keep pouring into them, still keep validating them, and letting them know that there's an open line of communication. Like Calvin said, loving them unconditionally, no matter what condition they find themselves in, and letting them know that if anything happens, you can call me. Do not be afraid to call me.
Yeah, always back to that relationship like we talk about so much on the show. Well, yeah, I'd love to hear a little bit more about STEM NOLA. That it sounds like an incredible program.
We're talking about self-esteem and self-agency in kids and loving them unconditionally and listening to your kids. When my son was in third grade, he came home and said, Dad, I don't like science anymore. And I said, boy, you're out of your mind. It's in your DNA. When your mom was listening to that crazy classical music, I was whispering Newton's laws to her stomach. And he said, no, Daddy, the teacher just talked to the board and I like to do things with my hand. So I listened to my son because I couldn't let this become a thing for him. And I went and I started buying all these science, technology, engineering, and mathematics kits, and we started doing this in the garage. My other son came out before you know it, the whole neighborhood came out. So we realized we had something that really allowed kids to find themselves, you know, like building this tribe. And sports do that for a lot of kids. You know, entertainment do that for a lot of kids, but we're doing it in science, technology, engineering, and math. So in 2014, my wife and I put up $100,000 of our own dollars and said, we're going to bring this to the community. So we have these big STEM events all across the state of Louisiana now and across the country, and we've engaged over 125,000 young people from kindergarten all the way to 12th grade doing hands-on STEM events. We surround these K-12 students with college students, and we pay the college students to come out and engage K-12 students. We put over $3 million in the hands of college students. Then we invite STEM professionals to come out and surround the college students who surround the K-12 students. We've created an entire ecosystem. We've created a tribe where people can come and find a sense of identity, a sense of belonging, a sense of confidence and competence, such that their self-esteem is built now because they have a place in the world for them. And we're so proud of it. We have so many kids doing great things. And more importantly, what COVID taught us is that we need a STEM literate society.
Yes.
Really, the children are the Trojan horse. The parents are coming, and we're really uplifting and educating the parents about what's happening in the 21st century and why their kids need to be supported and have access to these type things. So thank you all for having me. Absolutely. And all of these things play together. And we have to make sure that our kids have a place to plug into so that they can find that sense of belonging that we're talking about.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for joining us today. This has been a really wonderful conversation. I always get so much for my own parenting out of these. But Dr. Mackie, Dr. Smith, thank you so much for joining us today. And Natalie, thank you so much for being here and sharing your story too. I really appreciate you coming out and being so open and honest, and also getting a young person's perspective on what it's like. Getting sober young is not always easy.
Yeah,
so really great to hear your story. So thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today. Amy, of course, thank you for being here, and here's to good parenting, good relationships, and more awkward conversations.
Thank you, Jodie. Thank you, Amy. Again, thank you, Natalie, for sharing your story. And it was great to be on with you, Dr. Mackie. This has been an amazing conversation. And here's some more awkward conversations.
We are out of time, everyone, but please join us next week for another awkward conversation. Today, we're diving headfirst into the critical mission of clear, consistent messaging about substance use to our
Not having the answer as a parent is okay. You need to come back to it, but if you don't know in the moment, it's important that you're not just dismissing or making up something that you don't align with. And so you can say to your child, whatever the situation is, right? Well, I'm not really sure on this right now, right? Let's have this conversation a little bit later.
So as your family is growing and developing, really looking across as to who are your partners in parenting and how do we get that plan in place early?
Children are the physical manifestation of the unresolved issues of their parents.
Mm-hmm.
Make sure to check out getsmartaboutdrugs.com. Parents, caregivers, you can find so many resources of great information there about how to talk to your kids and make these conversations a little less awkward. A huge thank you to the Elks DAP, which is the largest all-volunteer nationwide drug awareness program, and also a huge thanks to the DEA for their outreach program and for making this possible.
The views, information, or opinions expressed during the Awkward Conversation series are solely those of the individuals, speakers, commentators, experts, and/or hosts involved, and do not necessarily reflect nor represent those of the production, associates, or broadcaster, or any of its employees. Production is not responsible and does not verify for accuracy any of the information contained in the series available for viewing. The primary purpose of this series is to educate and inform. This series does not constitute medical or other professional advice or services. This series is available for private, non-commercial use only. The production, broadcaster, or its channel cannot be held accountable for all or any views expressed during this program.